I'm Cat Oriel, a reporter with Forbes Breaking News. Today I'm here with Congressman Nathaniel Moran from Texas. Thank you so much for joining me today, Congressman.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to join you. Thank you for having me today with Forbes.
Of course. So we're speaking just one day after Harvard President Claudine Gay's resignation, and you spoke directly to her during the infamous now House Education hearing on anti-Semitism last month. And in a post on X yesterday, you wrote, "Her resignation is a reminder that the liberal elite's anti-Semitic behavior and their ethical double standards do not go unnoticed, and thankfully, consequences are beginning to follow." So can you elaborate more on your thoughts about Dr. Gay's resignation, and particularly what you meant by that line, that liberal elite's ethical double standards?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I really appreciate the opportunity to answer that and to talk about this because it's so important. Unfortunately, what we see in the academic world today is really that ethical double standard where Dr. Gay was holding out a standard in particular when you talk about the plagiarism issues, which didn't come up really in the hearing, but have subsequently come up as a result of shining the light on her and her background and her activities in Harvard. When you look at what she was saying she had done, students and what she was accused of, and frankly, what the evidence showed, students at Harvard would have been expelled under a certain ethical standard. But she was saying, "Oh, it's no big deal," or some at Harvard were saying, "Well, it's okay. We'll give her a pass on these issues." But then, as they began to compound those plagiarism accusations, it became quite evident that that ethical double standard only went so far for her as the president when it was compared to what would have happened to students. And then you look at the same as it relates to the questioning there in our committee hearing. When we're talking about anti-Semitic behavior, not just speech, but behavior, when you're going so far as to harass and intimidate a student on campus because they are Jewish. For many other students that would have been classified differently, an African American student or a gay and lesbian student who would have been harassed, that wouldn't have been put up with by Harvard. But of course, the Jewish students were under that same burden, and there was no protection for them from Harvard or, frankly, even the DEI office at Harvard and other institutions. We talked to other DEI offices about that as well. So there was this double standard about how to apply both the code of conduct to students and how to apply the ethical standards of plagiarism to Dr. Gay. And I was glad to see it get called out. Now, I don't rejoice in anybody's demise. Let me just say that. I don't rejoice in seeing Dr. Gay have to resign and leave her post, but she made those choices. And I tell my kiddos all the time, your choices have consequences. And so she made the choice to not directly address those issues on campus when they came up. She made the choice not to give clear and specific answers to Congress when she was called before the Congressional body. In particular, to me, when I asked her questions about what discipline had happened, she couldn't give me any answer for any action of discipline for any student. And so presumably no student had been disciplined over these anti-Semitic actions. And then she couldn't answer softball questions, frankly, from Elise Stefanik that were questions of, okay, if you're calling for the total genocide of a people, isn't that a violation of the code of conduct? And she just couldn't even answer that question.
You've touched on it a little bit, but yeah, like you said, the hearing is not only what she faced criticism for, but her several allegations of plagiarism. So since she's still at the faculty at Harvard, will the House Education Committee still continue the plagiarism probe against her?
Well, I don't know. That's up to the Chairwoman Fox, what she wants to do. There's just lots to root out here. I'm glad to see that accountability, though, is coming to her, and I'm glad that she recognized that she needed to step away for the institutional preservation of Harvard University. I mean, it's Harvard has been an institution in the United States for hundreds of years now that has provided great academic standards across the board. But as of recent, in the last 10 or 20 years, we've seen academics take a back seat to liberal policies and culture and DEI and movements that undercut true academics. And I think that's shown clearly by when you look at how many faculty there at Harvard actually have a conservative viewpoint and how many have a liberal viewpoint, I think one of my colleagues brought that out in the hearing. It's 95+% have a liberal viewpoint and less than 5% have a conservative viewpoint. Well, if you're talking about diversity, I mean, that's certainly not academic diversity where students have an opportunity to ferret those issues out and resolve them in their own life to decide how they believe on politics or other issues going forward in that tender moment when they're so malleable right after high school. And that's really important for kids to be able to have the freedom to think through those issues and to not have just one viewpoint pressed down on them.
And when it comes to accountability, Elise Stefanik did respond to the resignation with saying 2 down, referring to, Dr. Gay and former UPenn president Liz McGill. So do you think that also MIT's president Sally Kornbluth should also resign?
Yeah, I think so, because all 3 of the presidents that were there, certainly, again, there were softball questions from Ms. Stefanik. They should have been easy to answer. And it was a moment of truth. If any one of those 3 presidents had said, absolutely, this is unacceptable, we've taken action, we will not let it happen on our campus, we have extricated those students that called for the genocide of a total people group, they're no longer at our campus or they've been suspended, whatever the case may be. If somebody had stood up for truth and said, we are drawing a line in the sand, can you imagine the flood of support for that president and for that university to say, oh my goodness, you mean a university president at one of these liberal elite schools is actually standing for truth and actually drawing a line somewhere? And I think that's one of the underlying problems here among these top academic schools or so-called top academic schools is they're no longer willing to call truth truth and evil evil. They're no longer to draw any lines. Everything's acceptable. And that's not the case in this world. There is evil and there is good and there is truth. And when you're unwilling to accept that proposition, then you're totally awash without any foundation or without any mooring in your life and in your university.
So do you think that because of the backlash that the president's got and the attention that this hearing brought to the need for oversight of college campuses, and because a lot of these college presidents who take public money are getting more greater public scrutiny because of this hearing, and like you said, they could have also gotten support depending on how they answered, do you feel like that has opened the door for greater congressional oversight of college campuses? Is that needed now more than ever?
Well, I always want to be hesitant about congressional oversight. It should never be the first thing that happens in any situation in this country, because the less Washington, D.C. influence, frankly, we can have in every area of our life, the better. And so I would have liked to thought that the alumni, the board of trustees, the students, who were really the first line of defense for all of what was going on these educational campuses. It would have been nice if they would have just nipped this in the bud. If they would have stood up and said, we're not going to accept this. This is not the way our university should run. And so we're going to take a stand and make President Gay walk away and call her on the carpet for these things. And a few students did that, but the board of trustees rallied around her, and the alumni rallied around her for the most part. And that's the moment when then we have to step in and say, wow, these are bigger national issues. We have to expose this, or this is going to become more of an epidemic across academic campuses, more than it already is. And so you never want to come in with the heavy hand of congressional oversight at the outset. You hope that the private sector, that the university will handle it itself and take care of its own business.
Okay, interesting. So that being said, 2 questions. So how else does the House Education Committee plan on working to combat anti-Semitism, but moving beyond congressional oversight? What do you think should be done then? Is it a state level issue? Is it, what else can the college and universities be doing to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses then?
Again, I think we need to have a lighter touch when it comes to legislative action, because there is a need for private entities to make their choices and have that accountability. We need to expose that when it reaches a federal level. of influence and impact, certainly we need to be involved in that. But I think what you're seeing here is the result of appropriate congressional action, and that is we exposed to a great degree the underlying anti-Semitic thought process and behavior of a lot of these colleges and universities and their leadership. And as a result, those colleges and universities are now turning the light on themselves and saying, you know what, we're not going to go down this path. And donors in particular. I mean, Harvard lost over $1 billion to what I can see in donations to their university. And donors ought to be able to pull that money out and say, no, if you're not going to stand for some truth and some value in this world, we're not going to send our money there. And alumni can stand up and do the same thing. Students can stand up and protest, and they ought to when things like this happen in their colleges and universities. So, again, I hope that it gets resolved on the local school level. The heavy hand of the federal government, again, is never the first line of defense and should not be the first line of defense in any matter.
Well, people who also have a say are voters, and we're entering an election year. So how important do you think this moment is, as we're approaching the 2024 election when it comes to issues of education, DEI, like how do you see this movement playing out, especially heading into the next election year?
Yeah, it's a big issue because what we're fighting here again is kind of the buildup of, in my opinion, 50 years plus or 60 years plus of moral relativism, where anything goes. And as long as you accept my truth, I'll accept your truth. And frankly, there is no absolute truth. I mean, that's what people want to say in this world. And that's what seems to bind the liberal sector together, is everybody has their own truth. And as long as everybody agrees that I can have my own truth, then we're all bound together in that one truth. But that is so far gone from how this world was created. There is a moral, absolute truth. There is a God who determines that. There is evil and there is bad in this world. There is evil and there is good in this world. And normal, I think the normal day-to-day life bears that out in consequences, because the natural laws of this world have consequences when we ignore those absolute truths. And so we see that in our own lives by the decisions that we make. And I think in the political world, we're gonna see that happen this year, where folks that want to ignore absolute truths in this world are gonna have an election day not go as they want, because you can only push people so far, and then they say, you know what? I'm not willing to go that direction. And here, let me give you a great example on that. A great example on this moral relativism issue is the slippery slope and the slide of what's happened now with the transgender world. And women in sports in particular, this is the easy example. It goes way beyond this, but if you look at women in sports and all that was worked for and achieved in the 60s and 70s for women to have equality in that area, and now it's systematically being eroded in every single area. And as it erodes, at some point, even liberals look at it and say, well, this is the opposite of what we fought for. We actually fought for our daughters. I've got two daughters, and I've got two sons, and they're made differently, they're created differently, and I want my daughters to have equal chance to succeed in areas as my sons. But physically, as it relates to sports, that's the easy thing to see. We're physically built differently. And now you're going to let men actually participate in sports just because they say they identify as a woman. Well, now you're taking away all that we worked for, all that folks worked for over the years to make sure that our daughters and our wives and our mothers had the same opportunities that men in this world do. And that's even for liberals, I think they're shaking their head now saying, well, I didn't intend for it to go this far. Well, that's how far it goes when you say there are no lines and there are no truths and there are no absolutes.
Congressman, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to talk to you again soon about all of these topics and more.
Thank you, Kat. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today.